father. Meanwhile, the Biden document scandal is getting even messier. FISM's Ian Patrick has all the latest.
Thank you so much, Sam. In some rather shocking news coming out this week, the National Archives said that it was ordered to withhold information about the discoveries of classified documents in President Biden's think tank and personal residence, though it also refused to say who or what gave that directive. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer made the stunning revelation on Tuesday during an appearance on Fox News, along with fresh accusations that the White House and the Justice Department have been working in concert to conceal information from the public.
Well, right before the National Archives came in, they handed us a letter from the Department of Justice informing them and us that the General Counsel for the National Archives wasn't allowed to say anything about the Biden documents. So it shows right there that this Department of Justice and this White House is interfering with this and treating Donald Trump very differently than they're treating Joe Biden.
Thanks for that report, Ian. Meanwhile, still in Congress, House Republicans passed a bill this week that would end COVID-19 telework policies for executive agencies. The bill passed 221 to 206, with 3 Democrats voting alongside Republicans. Currently, more than 1 million federal employees work remotely. That's up from 483,000 in 2018. If signed into law, the legislation would give executive agencies up to 30 days to bring telework levels down to pre-COVID levels. Elsewhere, the U.S. is tracking what is believed to be a Chinese surveillance balloon that was spotted over American airspace this week. At one point, it was seen hovering above Montana, home to one of the nation's nuclear missile fields. Here's what it looked like from the ground.
It's been there stationary for about the last 35 minutes. It's about 5:30 on Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. I have no idea what this thing is. For those of you who might think this thing is the moon, there's the thing. And whoa, there's the moon.
The Pentagon says the balloon has been seen in U.S. airspace before. In some weather news, the Northeast is bracing for an intensely cold weekend, with certain areas possibly seeing wind chills drop to negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The deep freeze is expected to stretch from northern Pennsylvania all the way up to Maine. The National Weather Service says the icy cold temperatures will last from Friday into Saturday evening. This also comes as Texas and parts of the South are dealing with the aftermath of this week's winter storm that left 10 people dead and hundreds of thousands of people without power. In other headlines today, a new Project Veritas video allegedly shows a Pfizer executive sharing his concern about the impact of the company's COVID-19 vaccine on women's reproductive health. In some related news, the new data shows Pfizer, the company, also earned over $100 billion in 2022 off the vaccine, as well as from its anti-COVID drugs. And to end things on a better note, a Norwegian study does suggest that lifelong marriage may be a key to reducing the risk of dementia. And with that, those are today's headlines from FISM News. You can read about these stories and so much more over the weekend by heading onto our website. It's fismnews.tv. And you can also tune into our full program tonight. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, fism.tv/watch. You can also watch it by downloading the FISM channel to Roku or Amazon Fire TV as well. All right, stay tuned for Washington Watch with Tony Perkins, and we'll see you on Monday with more news coverage. Catch you then.
From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on this Friday edition of Washington Watch. I'm your host, Jody Heiss. Honored to be sitting in this evening for Tony Perkins. I am the senior advisor to the president here at Family Research Council, and it's an extreme privilege to be sitting in for him this evening. We've got a tremendous program lined up for you this evening, and you don't want to miss a bit of it. We will begin by talking about the infamous balloon, the Chinese surveillance balloon that has now breached U.S. airspace, obviously collecting intelligence over the state of Montana. Probably some within the Biden administration may think this is more inflation news, but no, I'm afraid it's much more than that. The Pentagon says they're monitoring the situation closely.
While we won't get into specifics in regards to the exact location, I can tell you that the balloon continues to move eastward and is currently over the center of the continental United States. Again, we currently assess that the balloon does not present a military or physical threat to people on the ground at this time, and we'll continue to continue to monitor and review options.
Not very convincing to me. That was Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder earlier today. So the big question is, what are the national security concerns? Joining me a little bit later in just a few moments is Montana Congressman Matt Rosendale, and we'll be discussing that. Then Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He was planned to visit Beijing next week to try to lower some of the tensions between the two superpowers, but now, for obvious reasons, that trip has been canceled. What are the broader implications? China expert Gordon Chang will join me a little bit later to discuss that. And then I don't know if you saw, but yesterday this kind of went under the radar, but the House of Representatives passed a resolution denouncing socialism. Obviously, that's an ideology that's led to brutal dictatorships, unspeakable poverty, and the death of millions of people.
Let's be very clear. Communism and socialism have limited freedoms, stymied economic innovation and opportunity, and limited prosperity, and left the very people it claims to help in a permanent state of poverty and government dependence.
That was conservative-leaning freshman Representative Michael Lawler of New York, whose wife, by the way, left a former communist country. So he knows what he's talking about. You would think that a resolution denouncing socialism would get unanimous support. And yet 100 Democrats could not bring themselves to condemn that very system. Is this due to a broader trend that we're told of younger voters who are opposing capitalism? Well, we'll discuss that a little bit later in the program with socialism expert Larry Taunton. And then we have a Florida church that has literally created a media firestorm simply by professing biblical views of gender and sexuality. But what happened next is truly remarkable, and it's become a national story. The First Baptist Church of Jacksonville, Florida, senior pastor Heath Lambert will be joining me later in the program to share his experience. And just a reminder, if you miss any part of this evening's program or you'd like to check out some other programs that are archived, you can always do so by going to TonyPerkins.com. So again, if you miss any part of the program today, be sure to check it out on the website. All right, with little happening in Washington today because our representatives are gone, the surveillance balloon from China absolutely is penetrating the news, as it is also penetrating U.S. airspace. The spokesperson from the Chinese foreign military said it's just a civilian airship used for research. They said that China regrets that this unintended entry into the airspace of the United States. Doesn't that make you feel better? We're all glad that this is just a civilian airship. They also said that it was monitoring the weather for research. And now we're all supposed to feel good about that. But the truth of the matter is that this has breached U.S. airspace. And I can't help but think of the many trips that I personally have made to the southern border to see how porous our southern border is and how easy it is for who knows who to enter our southern border. Is that problem indicative of now other countries saying the southern border of the United States is open? What else is open? Maybe their airspace. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is U.S. Representative Matt Rosendale. He's a member of the House Freedom Caucus, as well as the Veterans Affairs Committee and the Committee on Natural Resources. He represents the 2nd Congressional District of Montana, where this balloon currently is located. So, Congressman Rosendale, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us on Washington Watch.
Jody, it is great to see you again, my friend. We miss you badly.
Well, thank you so much. But listen, thank you for staying in the battle. You're a tremendous leader. Let's jump into this, Matt. First of all, your reactions. What did you think when you first heard that a Chinese aircraft had breached U.S. airspace?
First of all, you wonder what type of craft it is. And we were very slow to get information that it was actually some type of a balloon, a high altitude balloon. So my initial thought is at least we don't have to worry about our local air traffic running into it, because this thing was operating at somewhere between 65,000 feet and 80,000 feet. So you want to think of the immediate problems that could be causing. And then I started trying to extract as much more information as I possibly could from my adjutant general from the National Guard, the commanding officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is the Air Force Base in the north central part of Montana that's actually responsible for those 140 ICBMs, the missiles, the nuclear missiles that we have in place to protect our nation. And, you want to get this information and from the Pentagon. And unfortunately, Jody, there has not been a lot of information forthright, coming at very rapid of a pace. And so I received no sense of comfort from General Ryder's press conference that he put on today, because he didn't give a lot of information. He said that the military acted immediately to protect sensitive information. How do you protect sensitive information that's spread across hundreds and hundreds of miles of Montana landscape? That's where the missile field is located. How do you protect sensitive information that's being collected from a balloon that's operating at somewhere between 65,000 and 80,000 feet that's above one of our most guarded Air Force bases that are responsible for those nuclear missiles? And then for them to say that they're not going to give an hour by hour report on where this balloon is located is absolutely disgraceful. That we have to get the reports from the National Weather Service to tell us where this spy balloon is traveling around our country.
It's unbelievable. And listen, I share your concerns 1,000%. And, I think it's important for our viewers and our listeners to understand we're not just talking about a balloon. This thing is the size of like 2 school buses. It's large, it's loaded with sensors, and it's monitoring a lot of things. And so this is an enormous concern that it's in U.S. airspace right now. And Montana is a key place for so much of our nuclear capabilities and assets. So what are you hearing from citizens in your district, citizens there in Montana?
Well, they started seeing this thing in the sky, obviously. We do watch the sky. We don't have a lot of buildings in the way. And so they started bringing the reports in to see what was going on. We had reports that the airport in Billings had been shut down, and Bozeman had been shut down for short periods of time while they were scuttling some aircraft out there to check this balloon out. My question is, where did it come from? How long has it been in the United States airspace? Why wasn't it detected as soon as it entered from probably Washington and came across, or from Canada? Who's operating it? Where are they operating it from? And then finally, Jody, why can't we bring it? Look, if you can't shoot it down because you're worried about what type of gases or what kind of chemicals might be in the balloon itself, why can't we somehow bring this thing back to Earth and then take the equipment that's on it and do that analysis, do some reverse engineering, find out what's going on it, instead of just allowing it to continue to travel across the entire nation? Again, fortunately, the National Weather Service told us that at this point, it is somewhere over Missouri, heading east. Bring it down and determine what is going on. And then send Blinken to the Chinese Communist Party and let them know that we're not going to tolerate this type of activity.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it takes rocket science. The Pentagon said that this thing does not pose any threat for U.S. intelligence to be compromised because they're tracking it. Well, that's not enough for me. All right, just because you're tracking it does not mean that this thing is not posing some sort of threat to our national security. What are your thoughts on what the Pentagon said?
I've received no sense of comfort from General Ryder today, and I'm still waiting to hear back. We issued a letter to the Pentagon asking for this briefing. I've received no sense of comfort or information to help us figure out what's going on here. So that they're tracking it. Okay, what information is this balloon and the Chinese Communist Party gathering as it goes across our country?
Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there if I can, because that's a question. I really like to have your thoughts on this. The public may not fully understand that the ability already exists to spy via satellite. Okay, we know China is looking at our assets and looking at things through satellite, but what type of information do you think could be captured from this balloon?
See, that's what I don't know. And that's why I have more questions at the end of this day than I have answers. What information can they gather from that balloon, and what information are they gathering? Are they taking information about our refineries, our pipelines, our infrastructure, our vital infrastructure, detecting where the different places that are vulnerable when it comes to our power grid? There are so many pieces of information that they might be gathering right now. We have this rip and replace program that's going on right now with all of the Huawei technology that had been placed in our cell towers. So we finally have recognized that needs to be replaced to keep the Chinese from collecting data and spying on us. Well, what else are they looking at to see what they can do us harm? Look, the Chinese Communist Party wants to be the global power, and they are
absolutely
not. They're not sending that balloon across our country to check and see what wind conditions are in the Midwest.
Absolutely. We've got about 30 seconds. Congressman, you've been heavily involved on the southern border issues as well. Is it fair to compare the breach of U.S. airspace with our porous southern borders?
It is. And now we are also getting numbers, Jody, that the northern border is starting to have just the extreme amount of pressure as well. The illegal crossings have gone from 2,000 to 3,000 a year to up to 100,000 a year. So this country is being invaded on all sides.
Thank you so much, Congressman Rosendale. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for leading the way on so many issues. Great to see you again.
God bless you,
Coming
Jody.
Up, we'll continue our discussion on the China surveillance balloon. China expert Gordon Chang joins me right after the break. You don't want to miss it. This is critical information. Thank you for joining us on Washington Watch.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Jody Heiss, sitting in this evening for Tony Perkins. We appreciate you being with us. We're going to continue our discussion about China. This is an extremely important development that we must stay on top of. The State Department announced today that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is going to postpone next week's scheduled trip to Beijing. Of course, that was intended to try to soften the tensions between the two superpowers and would have actually marked the first high-profile visit by a senior U.S. diplomat since 2018, which, of course, was before COVID originated in Wuhan. But the question is, what kind of conclusions can we draw from all of this? Joining me now to react to this and more is Gordon Chang. He's the author of the book, The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. You can, in fact, follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang, and we encourage you to do so. But Gordon, thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch. Always good to have you back.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. So let's jump into this. Before we actually get into the diplomatic and policy implications of a Chinese aircraft above the United States and Secretary Blinken postponing his trip, I'd like to know your initial reaction when you first heard the news of this situation.
Well, certainly the balloon incident indicates that the Chinese did not want to talk to Secretary Blinken, didn't want to talk to the U.S., because this is an obvious provocation. Sending a balloon over a U.S. Air Force base, which houses intercontinental ballistic missiles, and loitering there is a real affront to the U.S. And they had to know that Blinken would have had to have canceled his trip, or at least postponed it. And what's even worse is that NORAD, the U.S. Air Force, is actually tracking a second balloon that is headed our way, pretty much on the same track that the first one is. And that's a real indication that the Chinese want to provoke a conflict, because otherwise the question is, why would they do something like that at this particular time?
Okay, what you bring up is an extremely important point, and I want to go a little bit further in both of them. Number one, you said they seemingly are intending to be provocative in what they're doing here. The question obviously is why, and why would they want to cancel next week's trip with Secretary Blinken?
That's a great question, and I don't have the answer to that, though I can probably speculate that Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, who's got full accountability, has a number of crises on his hands that he cannot solve. So, for instance, he has continuing debt defaults, plunging property prices, contracting economy, worsening food shortages, deteriorating environment, and, of course, the COVID-19 outbreaks. And maybe he wants to distract the Chinese people from policy mistakes which he can't solve. That's one possible explanation. I'm sure there's other things that are going on. The Chinese political system, Congressman, has gotten more and more opaque over the last couple of years. So we know less and less what's going on in Beijing.
Well, then let's bring it back here a little bit. There's been, in some regards, very, very little communication coming from the Biden administration and the Pentagon But then there have been some remarks, I think, largely unsatisfactory. But overall, what do you make of the response at this point from the administration and the Pentagon?
I think that it is clearly inappropriate. Here we have a Chinese surveillance craft now hovering over the United States, heading eastward. And there really is no response except to watch it. This should have been shot down well before it reached the United States, because the track of this balloon took it over Canadian territory, uninhabited Canadian territory, for hundreds and hundreds of miles. There was plenty of opportunities to intercept it, but they didn't do it. And, one indication is maybe the Chinese wanted to humiliate the United States in the eyes of the world, saying that the Biden administration could not defend American airspace. And, that's not an unreasonable interpretation right now, because we seem to be paralyzed.
Yeah, it really is. And, the fearful thought that we're talking a balloon. This is not like a major Air Force type invasion of our airspace. It's a relatively slow moving balloon, and we've let it come. And like you said, I was looking at the path of this thing earlier today, and yeah, there were multiple opportunities to deal with it. That said, Secretary Blinken has canceled his trip to Beijing, and I would like to get your reaction. Here's what the State Department spokesman Ned Price had to say yesterday about that planned trip.
That's always what we do when we engage the PRC. We speak and act in ways that protect and promote our interests and those of the broader international community, as we seek to see to it that the competition that really is at the heart of our relationship isn't in a position to spiral into conflict.
Wow. All right. Your reaction to that?
I first of all thought, even before the balloon incident, Secretary Blinken should not have gone to plan to go to China, because there was nothing that he could really accomplish there, given the nature of the discussions that we have seen from China. So what this balloon incident did was to break that off, and it's probably going to break it off for quite some time, especially if there are multiple balloon craft. This is a real indication that China just, for one reason or another, is not ready to deal with the international community on a good faith basis. And we have to understand that China is preparing for war. And it's unfortunate, but we need to prepare as well, because the Chinese, for various reasons, can take us by surprise right now. We don't have a sense of urgency. We're not understanding the way the Chinese think. And this is just a recipe for a historic disaster.
Well, that's what concerns me, Gordon. I've got to tell you, the realization that we seem to be so lackadaisical in this and allowing this thing just to continue its path. We've got about 30 seconds or so left. Where do we go from here? What should State Department, the Defense Department, what should be the actions at this point?
Well, if I were President of the United States, I would order Secretary Blinken to go to Taipei instead. And I would then start to cut relations with China. We need to impose costs on China for clearly belligerent behavior. We haven't done that. And because of that, the Chinese continue with belligerent conduct that could really lead to global war.
Gordon Chang, always great having you on Washington Watch. We appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Congress.
You're very welcome. All right, coming up, the House of Representatives have passed a resolution denouncing socialism. You might be surprised to find out just how many did not condemn socialism. Stay tuned.
Are you a university student?
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone, because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. We appreciate you joining us this evening. There was a House resolution condemning the horrors of socialism that passed yesterday, and you would think this would be a unanimous type of resolution, but there were 86 Democrats voting no, and there were another 14 who voted present. This is shocking. And who knows the reason behind it all? We do want to dig into that a little bit further. There is some polling that would indicate that upwards of 50%, I've actually seen some polling that says a little bit more than 50% of millennials and Generation Z have a somewhat or very unfavorable view of capitalism. But we know from history that socialism is an ideology that demands a concentration of power that inevitably leads to communist regimes, to totalitarian rule, to brutal dictatorships. And so at the end of the day, you wonder, how could anyone support this? Well, joining me now on the phone from Europe to help unpack all of this is Larry Taunton. He's an author, he's a columnist, he's the executive director of the Fixed Point Foundation. He is a student of Soviet history and certainly can offer a perspective on how that compares with the events of current day that we have here in the United States. So, Larry, welcome back to Washington Watch. We appreciate you joining us.
How are you, Jody?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Thanks for being on the program with us here. I know it's late where you are. We appreciate very much you taking your time. All right, we've got 100 Democrats who either wouldn't or somehow couldn't bring themselves to cast a vote condemning the horrors of socialism. Is that the real story here?
Well, you know, from their side of it, Jody, let's consider for a moment their argument. What they are saying is that this is political theater, and certainly there's an element of that. I mean, insofar as that this is a non-binding resolution. Does it change policy in the United States? No. Is it passing something into law? No. But a resolution like this is a good opportunity to get everyone on record stating their view on the subject of socialism. And socialism isn't defined in this resolution, which is somewhat problematic. It gives some loose, definition to the consequences of socialism. But here was an opportunity really to make a strong statement to those immigrants in the United States who come from socialist backgrounds, who came to this country, or rather the country where you are right now. I'm presently in Italy, which, by the way, has a very scary socialist past history. But here was an opportunity to get on record and state to those people, hey, don't worry. This country isn't going to become like the country you left. It isn't going to become like Vietnam. It isn't going to become like China. It isn't going to become like Russia. We're not going to do those. We're not going to become like Cuba. We're not going to do those things. And yet there were still plenty of American congressmen who wouldn't go on record condemning it.
Yeah, it's really amazing. In fact, I want to play a clip for you and get your response. This is from conservative-leaning freshman Congressman Mike Lawler from New York. Actually, his wife literally left a former communist country. Let's play the clip.
To be clear, this resolution is not about Social Security or Medicare, two programs with broad bipartisan support. It is about a sick ideology that has destroyed nations, ruined lives, and resulted in death and destruction around the world.
Well, that says it, doesn't it? Your thoughts?
Yeah, it does. Listen, socialist regimes, which is to say atheistic, secular regimes, killed no less, I think the resolution says 100 million. That's a conservative number. Those regimes killed no less than 125 million people in the 20th century alone. Now, that's more, Jody. That's more than all previous centuries' wars, religious wars, combined. So this is the danger of this ideology. It's always an attempt to create a utopia on earth, and the danger of the ideology, Jody, is because it sees human beings not as having intrinsic value, rather it sees them as really just the raw material, the brick and mortar for building the socialist utopia.
Larry, we've only got a little over a minute left, and I guess to some extent they could also argue that they're following the polls. That some polls are showing some millennials and Gen X generation are leaning towards socialism, and
Yes.
I mean, certainly some of these folks, they are, and certainly many of them are living in the economic days we're living in now, and so forth. But what are they missing? There's so much more involved here than this. Again, we've just got about 30 seconds.
Yes, Jody, listen, in my last book, if I can make a little plug here, it's called Around the World in More Than 80 Days, Around the World in More Than 80 Days. And what I did, Jody, is I went around, I've been in over 60 countries, and I wrote this book as a way of saying to those generations, millennials and Gen Zers, who, polls show that only 31% of Americans have ever been out of the country. And it was my way of taking them on a tour around the world, to those places, to China, to Vietnam, to Russia, to Cuba. I've been in them all. And to say, listen, I know you're being sold a bill of goods about America, but it's a lie. The people in those countries want to come here. And by the way, most of those
Larry, we're going to have to leave it there.
What socialism actually is. Thank you so much.
Larry Taunton, thank you so much for your expertise, and thank you for coming on Washington Watch with us this evening. Coming up, I'll discuss one church's unique response to a firestorm of local media. You don't want to miss this. Stay tuned to Washington Watch. We'll be back right after the break.
It begins here, and here, and here. Every day. Before you stand, you need solid ground. Standing in a culture that wants you to surrender the truth won't work unless you have a firm foundation. At Family Research Council, we have that firm foundation, and you can find us standing. We stand for the value of all human life. We stand for the right of families to flourish. And every day we stand for your freedom to believe and to live out those beliefs both at home and abroad. We work with government officials, educating them on the issues from a biblical worldview. And when necessary, we hold them accountable. We equip Christians across America to be informed and to take action in their communities. With our daily radio program, television appearances, and vast online presence, we reach people where they are. We envision an America where all human life is valued, families flourish, and religious liberty thrives. That won't be realized if we're not standing. Stand for faith. Stand for family. Stand for freedom. Stand with us at FRC. A recent NBC poll reveals that 71% of Americans say the nation is on the wrong track. Now, with this backdrop of pessimism, President Biden will speak to a joint session of Congress and the entire nation. on February the 7th to give his State of the Union address. Will his words match reality and offer a way forward, or will there be more of the same? My policies are working, and where they are not, it's because Republicans won't work with me. Well, as the prophet Jeremiah said to his nation, they had stumbled because they had chosen a different path, not the proven ancient path of God's Word. America needs to return to the proven path. Join me Monday night, February the 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern for the State of Faith, Family, and Freedom in America. Join us for the special broadcast from our headquarters here in Washington, D.C. as we seek to point the nation to those ancient paths. That's Monday, February the 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time at frc.org.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Jody Heiss, filling in this evening for Tony. Before we get to our next guest, I want to take just a moment to share something that I believe is very important and, frankly, would ask for your help. Over the past couple of years, we have watched this current administration. The Biden administration has brazenly weaponized the federal government to silence people who oppose their agenda. I think we can take some degree of encouragement from the reality that the House of Representatives has formed a select committee to try to bring some degree of accountability to the federal government that obviously in so many ways has overstepped their authority. They've gone off the rails. And so as this select committee is getting started, as it's getting going, I would ask as many as you as would. I urge you really to join us in urging these members to take immediate action to correct and prevent this overreach of government from happening and from continuing the weaponization of our government. So here's how you can help. I'm going to ask you to text the word committee to 67742. Just take your phone and text committee to 67742, or you can go to frcaction.org/House Committee, and you can sign a petition right there to help us build momentum for this select committee to do a very effective job for the sake of our Constitution, our freedoms, our liberties for all of us. Thank you in advance for your help with that. All right, as we come now to our next guest, last October, members of the First Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, unanimously voted to adopt a statement on biblical sexuality as part of the requirement for church membership. And the statement simply sets forth the Orthodox Christian position based on Scripture. And this is really a common practice for churches across the country, for a variety of different organizations and nonprofits and so forth. But the local media in Florida caught wind of this change and literally created a firestorm of controversy. But how the church handled the situation and what happened next is truly remarkable, and I'm very pleased and honored to welcome to the program Dr. Heath Lambert. He is a senior pastor at First Baptist Church in Jacksonville. He has served there since 2016. He's the author of several books, including The Great Love of God, Encountering God's Heart for a Hostile World. That will be coming out in April. So, Pastor Lambert, welcome to Washington Watch. It's an honor to have you joining us this evening.
It's very good to be with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for standing up. And wow, you've got a book coming out. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to speak about that. But you are living what you were just writing about right now as well. And I hope we get to that. But let's begin, if you would, just kind of walk us through what happened there at the church.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we, as a whole church, the church unanimously approved this biblical statement on sexuality. The church enthusiastically received it. There's no way for the church to pass something like that unless they're enthusiastic about it. And we gave ourselves 6 months to get everybody signed up, and there had not been anything going on until all of a sudden we started getting local news media requests. And I would answer their questions and meet with them. But as you could somewhat predict, the media did not portray what was going on in our church and what we were trying to do in a way that was honest and straightforward. And so we realized, hey, we're going to have to do something to get our side of the story out. And so I announced that we were going to cancel a Sunday evening service and hold an open mic event for anybody in the community who wanted to come and hear from us directly about what we were trying to do and give me an opportunity to address their concerns and answer their questions.
Well, that's amazing. And I hope our listeners and viewers caught that. You had an open mic service where people literally could come and express virtually whatever. You had no idea what was going to be expressed or talked about, but you had an open mic to address this. And I think it's worth mentioning, too, that this was not done to draw attention deliberately to the church or to create a controversy. This controversy really started by the local media over a simple declaration of your church that you were going to take a biblical view of marriage. And I've got to tell you, Pastor Lambert, I was extremely impressed by your response. It's a very, very gracious response and approach to the situation, and yet an uncompromising stance. So tell us about that open mic evening and what took place.
Yeah, well, so the situation was, it was being characterized as, in fact, the headlines were, our church voted to oppose LGBTQ rights. And there was no vote in our church to oppose actually anybody's rights. There was an effort in our church to clearly communicate what the Bible says about marriage and gender and sexuality. We wanted to do that. That's a timely thing to do because our culture is debating on that. Our members at our church teach Sunday school. They are our deacons. They're on the finance committee. We don't want confusion and debates on these core issues in our church. And so we required it of our members. And the statement was, LGBTQ members weren't welcome in our church. We were trying to attack them. We were trying to run them out. And so one of the things that the open mic event actually intended to do two things. It intended to shoot straight. Hey, let's talk about it. Let me give you a chance to ask me some questions. Let me give you a chance to hear from me directly about what's going on. And for anybody who thinks we don't want members of the LGBTQ community in our church, it gave me an opportunity to say, come on over, let's talk. And so we did. We put microphones on the floor, and you don't know what's going to happen when you do that. And we got a broad spectrum of questions and concerns, from people who were fully supportive in our membership to people who were diametrically opposed and hate us for doing it. But I was thankful for the opportunity to be able to meet the people who came and to be able to talk to them and let them see that you can disagree about something. You can believe what the Bible has to say without having it in for people who disbelieve the message. As a matter of fact, every single one of us disbelieved the message of Scripture until the Lord was kind and brought us to himself as we repented of our sins and trusted in him. The LGBTQ community they're our neighbors. We love them. We care for them. You're talking about this book that I've written called The Great Love of God. That is our message in this book. I want to show what God's character is as a heart of love and how he transforms his people into loving people. And one of the ways you love people is you tell them the truth, sometimes when that truth is something they don't want to hear.
Absolutely. And one of the things that happened that has picked up a lot of media attention, there was a self-identifying, a queer-identifying woman who stepped up to the mic on that open mic evening and asserted that for your church to reaffirm the biblical view of sexuality would only drive a wedge between God and those who are identifying within the LGBT plus community. I have a small snippet of what she said, and so if we can, let's play this clip.
For decades, our queer community has felt ridicule, hate, bigotry, and discrimination for simply being who we are. Forcing your members to sign a contract, erasing our existence, just adds to the mountains of resentment that LGBTQ+ people already have for the church at large.
And I know you've already had to deal with this a lot of times, but your response to that?
Yeah, I first of all, I was glad she came. I told her she didn't stay long. She made her statement and then she left. As I told her as she was walking out, I'm very thankful that you came. I'm sorry that you're leaving. She's welcome back in our church at any time she wants. I've actually made private attempts to reach out to her so that we could have even a more private conversation. God loves her. I love her. Look, oncologists know that if you love people, you got to tell them bad news. Bug inspectors know that if you love people, you got to tell them the bad news about what's in their house. Parents know that when you love your kids, you got to tell them things that sometimes they don't want to hear. And so my prayer for Katie is that she will do what I had to do and turn from her sins and trust in Jesus Christ. And along the way, I hope that we could see that, hey, it's possible for us to have a conversation. It's possible for us to have a relationship. It's possible for us to love one another when we have even significant areas of disagreement.
Well, I think that's fantastic. Before going to Congress, I was actually a pastor myself for about 25 plus years. And we went through some pretty big battles, some of which, like you're going through now, took on some national focus. And it's very difficult to navigate a congregation through the firestorm that you're experiencing right now. But overall, how have the members of your congregation responded? How are they doing?
I appreciate that question. And I got to tell you, one of my favorite things about my life is that I get to be the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida. These are the finest group of people I've ever known in my life, the finest group of people you could ever meet. They love Jesus Christ. They love the Bible. They love each other. They love our community with all of their heart. They voted enthusiastically and unanimously because they believe this statement is the truth of the Word of God. With all of their heart, they have stood behind it. They stood behind me when I did this crazy thing and said, guys, we're going to open up the doors and put microphones on the floor and we're going to listen to everybody. They welcomed everybody. We gave them donuts and coffee and hot chocolate. When Katie left, we had a number of our folks who ran after her to try to get her information and see if they could love her and serve her in any way. We got prayer teams in our church who were praying for her and praying for those in the community. The thing that breaks everybody's heart is that a message that is true, a message that is old, it took until 2012 for even one state in this country to be able to pass anything that would allow homosexual marriage. So we're just a little over a decade into the newness of this situation. And it is amazing how quickly our culture has forgotten that you could believe in marriage and you could believe that there were two genders. You could believe that sex was for marriage and not be a bigot. So it's hard on our folks to be called bigots when what we want to do is show the great love of God. We want to show care to people who are in desperate need of salvation. And we just want people to come in and know the Lord. We want them to turn from their sins, trust in Jesus. We want them to know a community that will love them more than they love their sexual sin. And so that's been the hard part. But our church is doing great and standing up under this very well because they're full of conviction and they're full of care.
I'm thrilled to hear that. I wanted to read actually a statement that you made with all of this that just made my heart warm because of the truth and the love and the compassion from which it came. But you said, we want to welcome you as we were welcomed. If you need help, we would love to serve you. If you would like to come and worship with us, you are always welcome to be part of what we are doing. Of course, when you come, we will ask you to respect our beliefs just as you want us to respect yours. But if you do come, we will welcome you, pray with you, serve you, and love you. We will also probably say some things that will challenge you. That's okay. real love can handle disagreement. I think that's so beautifully stated, and I just appreciate so much you taking that kind of position to stand for truth, but to do so gracefully and lovingly. So you made this comment that your intention and that of First Baptist Jacksonville is not to drive the LGBTQ people in your community away from church, but rather, as you just described, we're all in need of the grace of God because we're all sinners, and you want to make that message very clear. And so you make clear that the church does not exist to affirm sin, but to transform lives. Did you have any response from the non-church members who attended with the spirit with which the meeting took place?
Yes, we've actually had a lot of support. In fact, several people who came to the open mic showed up. They showed up ready to critique the church and ready to beg us to back down because they heard about everything from the media. But when they heard my opening remarks and they saw the actual statement, we had people that said, "Oh my goodness, the media is getting this wrong. What you guys are doing is right, and we are standing with you." We had some people come who say they're joining our church now. Our new members class is filled up. We've maxed out our new members class for this next month. So there's been a remarkably positive response from many, many people.
Pastor, we've only got a little over a minute, so in maybe 30 seconds or so, you're in the middle of a firestorm. And after you, it will be another church, it'll be another group. We're seeing more and more of this. How would you encourage Christians to have courage and to stand strong when the attacks like this come?
You know what? I decided about 25 years ago, and my church that I pastor now decided a long time before that what our job is, what my job is as a man, what my job is as a Christian, what my job is as a pastor, is to figure out what the Bible says, to say that clearly and to say that compassionately. And if you say what God says, if you say it in God's tone of voice, which is always full of love and grace, if you say that, then you can trust God with the response. There'll be haters out there, but there'll also be some who turn from their sin and trust in the Lord. And so these are tough times. We got to speak clearly. We got to speak compassionately and trust the Lord to be faithful.
Dr. Heath Lambert, senior pastor of First Baptist Jacksonville, Florida, thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch, and thank you for standing.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thanks to each of you for joining us on this Friday edition of Washington Watch. Hope you have a blessed weekend. Keep the torch ablaze. Go shine. God bless you. We'll see you next week.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.